We come to Berlin, we American presidents, because it's our duty to speak in this place of freedom. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Rich Horwath is the founder and CEO of the Strategic Thinking Institute, where he is a strategy facilitator and coach to executive leadership teams. He is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author of 8 books on strategic thinking, including his most recent work titled Strategic: The Skill to Set Direction, Create Advantage, and Achieve Executive Excellence, which was selected by Inc. magazine as a top 4 must-read book for 2024. Rich has appeared on ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox TV to provide expert commentary on business strategy, and his work has been published in Fast Company, Forbes, and the Harvard Business Review. He's a former chief strategy officer and professor of strategy at the graduate level, and has helped more than 250,000 leaders develop their strategic thinking and planning capabilities over the last 2 decades. And I've been stalking Rich on social media lately, and suffice it to say, he's got some good stuff. I'm so pleased you're here. Rich, welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast.
Mike, it's really great to be with you. I'm a big fan of your work as well, and been reading some of your books, Ancient Wisdom and Principle of War for Corporate Battlefields. So excited to chat today.
Yes. Well, listen, the intro, I say this every podcast, but there's varying degrees of beef behind it. You have an extensive background, and our intro did not do you justice. So tell us a little bit more. What more do we need to know personally and professionally about Rich Horwath?
So, Mike, I'm going to date myself a little bit, but close to 30 years ago, I was working for a marketing firm, and I was helping organizations write strategic plans. And we were doing a typical offsite strategy session. And at one of the breaks, a coffee break, one of the mid-level managers came over and said, "You know, Rich, I just had my performance review, and my boss said I'm too tactical. I need to be more strategic." He said, "How do I do that?" And Mike, now this is going back about 30 years ago. So most of the books on strategy back then were things about corporate strategy or business unit strategy, books like Corporate Strategy by Michael Porter, C.K. Prahalad from Michigan had some of the books. And obviously with your military background, a lot of the great treatises on military strategy were out there. But there was nothing really to help the individual leader be strategic day in and day out. So that was my light bulb moment that said, you know, this could be a really interesting thing to pursue. So I started doing research, started writing articles, and then started my own company about 22 years ago, really with that one question in mind: how do I become more strategic? So that's really been my life's work the last couple decades, is giving managers and leaders at all levels a true roadmap that they can use day in and day out with practical tools to think, plan, and act strategically to build their business.
Yeah, I love it. Well, let's get into your company a little bit. Is it just you? Are you a solo entrepreneur? You have a team? Who are your clients, and what do you help them? What problems do you help remedy?
Yeah, so thank you for asking. So I've got a small team here, but mighty, because we like to bring a lot of tools and expertise to folks. And so typically we work with organizations that are struggling to set strategic directions. So, if you've been in an organization and people have lots of different definitions of what is strategy, what are tactics, what's a mission, if you feel like people are moving in lots of different directions, there's no unity in people getting their forces together to move in one direction. I also work with groups where they're overly reactive to fire drills. There's things popping up all the time. Their people are rushing to put out the fires, but they're forgetting what the real priorities are day in and day out. And then I also help leaders who tend to find themselves drifting in the tactical weeds of the business. They're dipping down 1, 2, 3 levels to do things that other people should be doing. So really in those areas, helping people set strategic direction, helping people create competitive advantage, and then helping people be proactive and strategic instead of reactive and tactical. And so I work with executive leadership teams across all different industries because I found those challenges really are industry across different industries. So that's been my focus, and like I said, have been excited to try to bring new practical tools to folks in those areas.
Yeah, excellent. I love it. Well, I ask everybody this up front. If you were limited to just 2 or 3 sentences, and don't have to limit it to 3 sentences, but if just a couple of minutes, what's your highest level executive summary of Rich Horwath's philosophy of leadership?
Yeah, so my philosophy of leadership, I would begin with my definition. And my definition is leadership is the ability to set direction and serve other people to achieve goals. And so when we do that, when we set direction, when we serve other people and we achieve goals, we're going to give ourselves a good chance to be successful. But the other piece I would add is new growth comes from new thinking. As a leader, you have to be finding new sources of ideas and insights so that you can create new value for the people that you're serving internally and externally.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I got to ask you the classic timeless question, leaders born or made?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that leaders are made. I don't believe anybody comes out of the womb and says all of a sudden I'm a leader and I'm directing people and helping people. I think again, Mike, a lot of the wonderful work you've done over the years with trust-based leadership, there's multiple elements to being a leader. And so I think we'd be remiss if we think somebody just has that natural talent. It has to be sharpened, it has to be honed, it has to be polished. And I think, as we've seen over the last few years, especially, just because a leader has good strategy doesn't mean they're successful. Just because a leader is able to build good culture and trust doesn't mean they're successful. They've got to be strategic. They've got to have good emotional intelligence. They got to be able to bring trust. They have to be able to summarize. They have to be able to present. They have to be able to communicate. So there's lots of facets, and nobody's born with all of those, but we can certainly develop those with good technique.
Yeah, I love it. Well, during my research, I read a couple statements that you made, and I'm paraphrasing here, and I don't know whether they're your quotes or somebody else's, but they cite some statistics. So I'm going to read the first one and ask you to elaborate it on a bit because I found it fascinating. It said, a recent survey showed that only 44% of organizations have a universal definition of strategy, and only 46 have a common language for it. This lack of clarity leads to confusion, inefficiency, and ultimately bad strategy. And I can tell you, as a military guy, that made my skin crawl. That, wait a minute, you can't have 14 infantry battalions, each with different definitions for certain things. It's
Right.
there's a glossary of terms.
Yes.
So
Yeah, especially with your background. I mean, in the military, obviously strategic, operational, tactical, very well defined. What's
yes.
interesting, and I did do that study, I researched, did surveys with 400 different talent management leaders to find out, do you have a similar definition of strategy? Do people have a common language? And like you said, the research showed that less than half of organizations have a common language, have a common understanding of strategy. And Mike, as you know, in your business background in recent years, if we don't have that unified understanding, then each time we get together to communicate, we're starting from a different point. And so we waste time then trying to get people on that proverbial same page as to what strategy is. And research out of Harvard actually showed in the last 10 years in the literature, there's 91 different definitions of strategy. So we're not making it easy on ourselves. But again, when I think about strategy, I really think about the intelligent allocation of resources through a unique system of activities to achieve our goals. So really strategy is how you plan to use your resources to achieve your goals.
Yeah, I love it. Follow-on question, is strategic thinking obviously is necessary to devise a strategy. Is that mostly expected of high level senior executive C-suite and maybe SVP level? Is it, I would imagine, I mean, I was a C-level executive, And not everybody had that ability. It would have been nice if they had, but I say to be at least an effective senior executive, you've got to be able to look over the horizon too, strategy, not just this quarter. What about machine learning, or how's AI? I mean, these trends that are emerging and all of that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really important point, Mike, because as a leader, one of the important things we have to be able to do is we have to be able to understand the situation that we're in. We have to be able to break down the context, what's happening around us before we can formulate plans. In the military arena, as you know, you can't set up a battle plan without understanding what's the terrain like. Is it going to be muddy? Are we going to be able to
Exactly.
move tanks through that? Do we need to use air support? So you have to understand the situation that you're in. And so strategic thinking is our ability as a leader to generate insights that are going to lead to advantage. And I define an insight simply as a learning that leads to new value. So as a leader, I think leaders at all levels need to be strategic, because if you're not generating new ways to bring value to those that you're serving internally or your external customers, then we're going to be obsolete. We're going to put ourselves out of business because we're not able to keep up with what's new and what's important. So I think strategic thinking is a skill I've seen over the years where it's really important at all levels, because we've talked about this in before the show. As a leader, you've got to be able to allocate your time effectively. And if we're not strategic, then we can potentially get lost in lots of different things that actually
Yeah.
don't add value. We get distracted with the noise. We get caught up in the noise. So we're actually doing things that really don't impact the business.
Yeah, great answer. I love it. Superb insights. I want to touch again on the only 46% have a common language for strategy. And so I want to take that strategic example and ask you a tactical question. In trust-based leadership, there's a chapter called Common Operating Language, and it touches on this particular facet of, I don't care what you call it, in a shoe company, a drill bit company, a healthcare company, but you have got to have a glossary of terms and definitions that everybody agrees this is our dictionary. Otherwise, you have sat, and I have sat at meetings where one guy is saying the apple, the other guy saying that round red fruit, the other one saying that vegetable, only to argue and realize 20 minutes later they're talking about the same thing. And so I'm a big decentralized command and control guy, but there are some things where I am very rigid about. And the glossary of terms, a common operating language, is one of them. And so it's one of the exercises I put executive teams through. And they have these terms, but it's not usually codified and enforced. And so that's when the sales guys say, I made a client visit, a sales visit, a liaison. There's 10 different names. And what are they entering into the customer relationship management system?
Right.
What is it? And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on what you think the strategic value is in a tactically used tool like a common operating language. Call it, what do you call that? That was my term. Is it a dictionary? Is it an operational glossary? I know you're agreeing the need for it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. More specific, I'd like the audience to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, to your point, the biggest area I see confusion is around the basic planning terms. And as a leader, we always need to answer two questions. We always need to answer, number one, what are we trying to achieve? And number two, how are we going to achieve it? Those two questions need to be answered. And Mike, to your point, one of the things I find is people don't clearly answer those two questions, the foundational questions of a plan, sometimes at all, in the 50 or 60 slides in their PowerPoint deck that's a plan. You can't find the answer to those two simple questions. So what I tried to do is give people what I call the GHOST framework. And you're obviously familiar with goals, objectives, strategies, tactics with your background, and everybody out there is familiar with that. But one of the things I remind people is goals and objectives answer that first question. What are we trying to achieve? Strategy and tactics answer that second question. How are we going to achieve it? So again, when I think about a goal to me is something general that we're trying to achieve, like to get to the top of the mountain. The objective then is going to be more specific and quantified. So in this case, maybe we want to ascend 3,000 feet each day for 4 days till we hit that 12,000 foot summit. That's our objective. So we want to answer those two questions. Then we can say, okay, how are we going to do that? How in general terms are we going to hit that goal and objective? So the strategy really lays that out. In this case, it might be, do we need to go straight up the mountain? Do we need to zigzag? Do we need to go the other side? What's our path to getting there? And then the tactics are really those simple, tangible, specific things. So in this case, do we need ropes, pickaxes? Do we need a boat to go around the other side? What are those terms? So again, in my world, something like goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, to your point, I hear people defining lots of ways. If we define them simply as goals and objectives answer the what question, strategy and tactics answer the how question, now all of a sudden we've got that common operating language from a planning perspective. And to your point, there's going to be other terms that we want to define, but when I work with leaders from a strategy standpoint, those typically are the four that get the most confused.
Yeah, I love it. And I got to tell you, for what it's worth, you and I are completely aligned on what you just said. Strategy, goals and objectives, tactics. I mean, you nailed it. I was listening. I'm like, well, this was Rich in the military, because you're using a lot of military doctrine, and I couldn't say it any better. So good on you. Or maybe we copied your stuff. I don't know, but it's great minds think alike, I guess. But I want to read the next quote. Research by Harvard Business Review reveals that a staggering 67% of managers believe their companies struggle with developing effective strategies. When combined with findings that over 80% of business failures stem from poor strategy, the stakes are high. That's some amazing numbers right there. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about them.
Well, Mike, it goes back to this idea of, and you know this from your military background, you have to have the big picture in mind. We can't get so tunnel visioned in one area that we lose sight of the other things happening. So for leaders out there, one tool that I would share with you, and you can do it right now if you wanted, is draw a circle on a piece of paper, draw a line down the center from top to bottom, and then a line across from left to right. So you've got a radar screen now with 4 areas with that circle and the 2 lines. And what I would say then, in one area, put market, another area put customers, another area competitors, and then the other area company. So now you've got market, customers, competitors, company. Now you've got a radar. So as a leader, what we want to do then is say, okay, what's top of mind for me in each of those areas? What are the patterns or trends I'm seeing in the market? What's happening with my customers? What is their thinking and behavior? What are the competitor activities that are out there? How are they trying to win in the market? And then what's going on within my company? Do we need a new CRM system? Do we need to improve morale to help the culture? Do we need to build greater trust internally? What are some of those key things happening? So again, I think as a leader, if we start with a good situational analysis like that radar screen, now we've got the basis for starting to think about strategy, because I think, Mike, too many people are developing strategy in a vacuum. They're not really looking at the big picture before they develop their strategy. In medicine, a doctor always has to diagnose somebody first before they prescribe medication. You have to diagnose first. But in business, I see very often where leaders are not diagnosing. They're going right to, let's prescribe this project, this activity, this tactic. Yeah. Let's just go do this. Let's get on that activity treadmill, instead of stepping back, doing something like the contextual radar to say, what's the big picture look like? Now, based on all of that activity, let's develop strategy. So I think the reason 67% of people say that their company's not good at developing strategy is because that stuff takes some time. And we're working in the business instead of stepping out of it to look at how are we working on it.
Yes, I agree. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your book, again, titled Strategic: The Skill to Set Direction, Create Advantage, and Achieve Executive Excellence. Well, the obvious questions are, why did you write the book and what audience is it aimed at, Rich?
So during the pandemic, I was doing a lot of coaching on video, on Zoom and Teams, and I was getting permission to record the videos, and then I would transcribe them with AI software. And so I was reading the conversations that I was having with people, and the one word, Mike, that kept coming up was this word navigate. Executives were saying, I'm having trouble navigating this new marketplace. My people are having trouble navigating the competitive landscape. So what I realized, and looking at other research that showed 70% of executives were simply overwhelmed with their business and all the things that coming at them, I said what might be helpful is to give executives a framework, a compass to help them navigate their business. And so I developed this framework with using a compass with 4 areas: strategy, leadership, organization, communication. And within that, there are, again, areas like resource allocation, decision making, innovation, customers, to help people, executives, navigate the business. So the book is really designed for anybody that's a leader. So first line leader, second line leader, up to the C-suite, because everybody, I think, could use some potential support to help them navigate their business, almost like a checklist to make sure that they're not missing anything that could be important to setting their direction.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Well, I wanted to ask you this. I mean, we've already talked somewhat about this. Strategic is a term that is often overused and misused in the business world. I think we agree on that. And you've defined it previously. And so I think you're welcome to restate that. But I also want to know, people listening to this, like, I think I'm guilty of this. I need to become more strategic. You have a couple bullet points you can throw out at leaders who are all aspiring to excellence. And let's just say I counseled somebody and I did it wrong. You need to be more strategic, Susie. And then didn't give her any examples of what I'm interpreting that is. How would you backstop me and say, well, look, Mike was a little clumsy on that. You do need to get more strategic, but I would recommend you consider doing A, B, and C. That's what I'm looking for here.
Well, Mike, I think you would always be right on the money. So, but for other folks out there, to your point, I would consider 3 A's, right? 3 A's: acumen, allocation, and action. So acumen represents insight. What's the new value that we're bringing? So whenever you start a new project, whenever you're in a meeting, we want to always think about what's the new value here. If you're in a meeting each week, a couple different meetings, and you walk out and there's no value that you have or that you've provided for other people, then we need to think about eliminating that meeting. So to me, the first A to be strategic is acumen. What's the new value here? The second A then is allocation. Where are you focusing your resources, your time, your attention, your talent, and your people and budget in order to be effective? Because, Mike, as you know, great strategy demands we be very specific on what we're not going to do as just as much on what we are going to do. I think it was Karl von Clausewitz, the Prussian general, who said, there is no higher and simpler law of strategy than that of keeping one's forces concentrated. And so I think this idea of focus is truly important. So that's the second A, allocation. And that third A is action. Each and every day, we have to be able to execute the strategy by focusing on our priorities, those 1 to 3 things that are going to have the most impact on our people and our business. So if we keep those 3 A's in mind: acumen, allocation, action, I think that's a way for us to think, plan, and act strategically on a regular basis.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, let me ask you a question. That was great advice. And I love those 3 A's. I'm going to borrow them from you. Yeah. Now I'll give you credit where credit's due. I love it. I never thought of those words before, but they really hit me like a frying pan in the face. I'm like, wow, that's a great way to say it. So thank you for that. Um, what what do you think? I mean, I know you've done this a lot more than me as far as the strategy coaching and all of that and development. I believe that you've watched enough leaders to know that there's some common pitfalls and mistakes they may make or run into as they desire to develop their strategic effectiveness and competence, so to speak. Assuming that I'm correcting that, could you list some of them?
Yeah, sure. So, the thing that I equate strategic, and I like to think of strategic as fitness. So strategic fitness. And we think about it, if we go for a jog for a mile one day out of the year, and that's all the cardio exercise we do, then we're probably not going to be physically fit. But in many cases, leaders spend 1 or 2 or 3 days a year developing their strategy, and then it gets put away in an Excel spreadsheet or PowerPoint
Yeah.
deck, and they're not really being strategic throughout the year. So, what I like to say is, if we're going to be strategic, we've got to be able to practice that. So, one thing I recommend to leaders at all levels is pick the 2 or 3 behaviors that are most important to your job, your role, and then develop a practice plan for those. Anybody that's been an athlete out there, you can't be a great football player or baseball player or tennis player unless you're practicing. Practice your ground strokes in tennis, practice your serve in tennis. So as a leader, what are the things that you need to practice to become better? Maybe one of the skills is listening. So develop a 3x5 note card, bring it to each meeting. Before the meeting, tell yourself, I'm going to listen for 5 seconds after someone speaks before I come back with something to respond to them with. So that means I'm not judging them. And then in the meeting, work on that skill of listening. Really focus on, what's being said, how is it being said, and then play that back to them to confirm that you're really listening. So that's one of the mistakes I see, Mike, all the time. And then the other big one is really confusing strategy with your purpose, with your mission, vision, and values. So, we don't want to say our strategy is to be number one in the market or to be the premier provider of our secret sauce. Those are really more mission-based things. Strategy, again, is how are we going to get to what we want to achieve? Mission, vision, values is really the why are we doing this? So mission is why are we doing it today? Vision is why are we doing to aspire to this in the future? And then values are what are the guiding principles that are going to help us be good day in and day out?
Yeah, I love it. I was going to ask you for your definitions of vision and mission and strategy, and I wonder if you've seen this. I have seen all three used interchangeably. And as you said, there's so many definitions for strategy. I think if you type in leadership, there's even more definitions for leadership. There's at least 30,000 leadership books on Amazon. So no one is the burning bush, so to speak. No one gets to slap the table and say, that is the definition and all of that. So I think, well, I know people struggle with this. Could you go into a little bit more and tutor people a little bit on despite what if I was coaching you, Rich would tell you again, vision means this, mission means that, and here's how they intersect. Here's how one supports the other.
Mhm.
Hopefully, I'm saying it right, but I think you get the gist of what I'm asking for. So please share your insights.
Yeah, so it's a great distinction, Mike, that you make. So the way I see it is mission is why do you exist as a business? What is your purpose as a business? That's what your mission is. So, what are you doing day in and day out to serve others? That's your mission. So it's really very present tense. Mission is what are we doing? Why do we exist today in order to be of value to the people that we serve? So it's really why present tense. Vision then is what do we aspire to be down the road, 10 years, 15 years, maybe 20 years down the road? What do we aspire to be? Let's paint a picture of that aspirational future so that the people that are working in our company and our customers can be excited about where we're going down the road. So again, mission, very present tense. Why do we exist? Vision is really what do we aspire to be long term, 10, 15 years? What are we going to be kind of when we grow up in 10, 15 years? What does that destination look like?
Yeah, I love it. Well, Rich, you've in your course of your practice and of course your professional experience prior to that, you have observed, worked for, worked with, reported to, been client, had clients. You've observed so many leaders, is what I'm getting at. I'd like to ask you a two-sided question, two sides of a coin, so to speak.
Mhm.
Are there any, speaking of the top 10%, like the very top, the best you've ever seen leaders, are there any traits and habits that you've observed that most of the very best leaders seem to have in common?
Yes, definitely. So the first one would be an explorer's mindset. So what I mean by an explorer's mindset is that they walk into all of their interactions on a regular basis. So a staff meeting, a customer meeting, a board of directors meeting, and they go in with an explorer's mindset, meaning they don't walk in thinking I know everything and my job as a leader is to tell everybody what to do. Their mindset is, I want to explore other people's minds, other people's ideas to see how their ideas intersect with mine and what can I learn from them and what can I do differently or better in ways that I'm serving them, either internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. So I think that's the number one trait that I've seen is having that explorer's mindset. The second one I think is really this idea of, are you able to connect with someone on an emotional level? And when I say emotional, I don't mean, hugging and singing Kumbaya in a circle, but I mean, are you able to be authentic with them, tell your stories, hear their stories, and then find common ground on which you can both relate to one another? I think that's really important that I've seen the best leaders do is they're able to make that emotional connection with everyone from who's ever, doing the janitorial services at night to the chair of the board of directors. They are able to find that common ground with people. I think that's a big one. And then the third one I think is just the ability to look into the future and see what's next. And again, I don't think that's looking at a crystal ball. I think it's being a leader and having the discipline to carve out time in your very busy schedule to think about the future, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years from now. Where do we want to be? How do we need to position ourselves to get there? Most leaders are not taking that time individually or as their team and thinking about the future. They're only thinking about today. And those are the ones
Yeah.
that get blindsided by new entrants in the market.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely, especially all of it, but especially that last line. I tell executives, if you are Monday morning, your primary focus is what your company is going to do this week, you're in trouble because
Right.
you're in trouble because you're not projecting. In fact, if you're the CEO and you're thinking about what it's going to be doing this quarter, you're in trouble. There's only a few people in the company tasked with being lawfully able to put their feet on their desk and sit like this and ponder what's going to happen 3 years from now. Where's AI going? How's it going? Is it going to help my business? Can it crush my business? We need to get on this. And
Yes.
so I love it. Well, let's talk about the dark side of the coin, the least effective, ineffective, the bad leaders, the leaders that really don't get the job done. Any traits and habits that most of them also seem to share?
Yeah, so I would say the first one for leaders that are not as effective is they're reactionary. They're reacting to everything. So anything that comes across their desk, they're reacting to. And then I counsel leaders, and sometimes I'll actually send them a domino, and I'll say, don't be the person that's always knocking over the domino so it falls into the other dominoes. Because as a leader, you've got people responsibility. As soon as you put something out on text or send an email to one of your direct reports saying, what about this? All of a sudden, they're going to drop what they're doing. Other people are going to drop what they're doing. So as a leader, you've got to be really disciplined to understand what's important and not just react to things. So as I counsel a lot of leaders, when something comes across your desk, instead of just reacting to it, stop and say, let's think about this. And you can just say that internally to yourself, but let's think about this, because your people are already up to their eyeballs probably in priorities. Are you going to throw another item onto their plate and potentially overwhelm them? Or are you going to think about, what can I do to protect them and protect their priorities? So I'd say that's probably the main one, is being too reactionary, especially too when competitors come out with a new product, a new advertising campaign. Well, okay, we've got to go do that too. Well, wait, maybe we don't need to do anything. We don't need to react at all. So again, I'd say reactionary is probably the main one. And then the second one would really be about not listening. So again, it may be intentional or not intentional, but if we're not hearing what's happening around us, if we're not hearing the best ideas from our people, if we're not hearing what our customer really wants, then we're missing out on new ways to bring value. So I would say those are probably the two biggest ones, is being too reactionary and not really actively listening to the people around us.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Well, listen, we're running short on time, Rich. It's been a great interview. I can't let you out of here without asking you a fantasy question. If you were able to bring back one leader from the past, spend a day with that person, who would it be? And why did you choose that person?
Well, one person from the past, I'm going to go way back here. I'm going to go with Moses. So I'm going back to the Bible. And one of the things I admire about Moses, no matter what your belief system are, is if you read some of the stories, to be able to lead for 40 years and to do it successfully with people really never happy with what their current conditions are, and to keep that group together, to have the vision of what you really are trying to achieve, to keep a group unified, and then to successfully get them where they need to go. I think people can do that for a short amount of time, but for 40 years, to me, there's a lot to be said for that. So that would be one of the folks that I'd like to bring back.
Yeah, well said. That's a first. We've had many other, in fact, I did another podcast today, and that person would bring back Jesus Christ and all that. And there's been a few that selected them. So that's a first. You're the first one for Moses. And I got to tell you, yeah, it's a classic story of leadership. I mean, could you imagine 40 years, with people that are homeless, and he's just trying to sell them on a vision. We're going to get there.
Yes.
But probably not this year, So wow. Yeah, I love it. Well, listen, it's been a great episode. I'm sure someone's going to reach out. How do people find you? Where do we find your books? Where do you hang out on social media? How do we stay present with you?
Yeah, Mike. So I'm a big believer that we've got to give back. So I have a lot of free articles, free videos, infographics on strategy, strategic thinking, strategic planning on my website, which is strategyskills.com. So strategyskills.com. You can also find information on my books, my courses, workshops, coaching. All of it would be on strategyskills.com. And then you can find the new book, Strategic, really wherever books are sold, on Amazon or the bookstores.
Got it. Well, Rich, it's been a pleasure. Can't thank you enough. It worked out exactly like I thought. This is going to be a popular episode, and I've learned a lot. I don't know if you saw, but I've been sitting here taking notes the whole time. So it's a learning experience for me. So I can't thank you enough. Selfishly, I'd ask that you consider coming back for another episode someday.
Well, Mike, thank you. I'm a big fan of your work as well. If you folks out there haven't picked up Mike's Principles of War for the Corporate Battlefield, or Ancient Wisdom, I'm learning a lot of new things there, because that Stoicism's not something I've studied a lot in the past. So those are great. And obviously, Trust-Based Leadership, the classic. So I'm a big follower, Mike, of yours, and will continue to follow you as well.
Well, thank you for the kind words and support, Rich. And as always, go be safe and healthy and be happy. And thank you so much again.
Thank you, Mike.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Heracles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.